There are three mental states that interest me, said Amanda, turning the lizard doorknob. These are 1. Amnesia, 2. Euphoria, 3. Ecstasy. She reached into the cabinet and removed a small green bottle of water lily pollen. Amnesia is not knowing who one is and wanting desperately to find out. Euphoria is not knowing who one is and not caring. Ecstasy is knowing exactly who one is and still not caring. Some readers were probably surprised to learn that Amanda spoke with a lisp. The author would be pleased to describe her lisp for you, although it will not be easy. Marx Marvelous observed that it was a Gene Tierney lisp, but he was wrong. It was slighter than that. Slighter, warmer, pinker, more vulnerable. It was more of a Gloria Graham lisp. Remember Gloria Graham in The Big Heat? Her gangster boyfriend threw a pot of scalding coffee in her face. A noisy episode. Gloria Graham didn't lisp when she screamed. If you don't remember Gloria Graham, or even if you do, maybe you have heard of the Great Blondino. He was the Mozart of the tightrope. The Great Blondino. A child prodigy, Blondino was already a virtuoso of high rope acrobatics at 6. As an adult, he won fame for his repeating crossings of Niagara Falls. In the 1860s, he walked a rope over Niagara once on stilts, once with both feet in a sack. He hopped over with a man on his back while fireworks popped in the air above him. Once he sat down on the rope, hundreds of feet above the roaring cataracts, and cooked and ate an omelet. Throughout his career of perilous performances, he never had a close call or sustained an injury. While walking a safe city sidewalk during a stay in Sydney, Australia, however, Blondino slipped on a banana peel and broke his neck. Picture Amanda's lisp as that banana peel. Or let us look at it in another way. A Chinese philosopher once taught his pupils the meaning of aggression by having them wad up spring blossoms and throw them against a wall. To arrive at an understanding of Amanda's lisp, simply reverse the process. Among the Haida Indians of the Pacific Northwest, the verb for making poetry is the same as the verb to breathe. Such tidbits of ethnic lore delighted Amanda, and she vowed that from that time onward, she would try to regulate each breath as if she were composing a poem. She was as good as her word, and her new style of breathing added to her warehouse of personal charm. Once, while breathing an especially strenuous stanza, she sucked in a stink bug that had been bumbling by. "What a rotten rhyme," she gagged. "I think I'll go back to prose." Amanda took Marx Marvelous on a tour of the grove out back. There was moss in the grove and fir needles and firs. There was mud and grass and weed, but no rocks. There was a teepee and a wooden table carved to resemble a mushroom. On those rare days when it was not raining, the grove was the Zillers' living room, nursery, and dining area. It was here, protected and private, that they entertained their few and mostly uninvited guests. In his checkered suit, now rather soiled, Marvelous strutted about the grove, jaws flapping. "Yes, there is an air of asylum out here," he flapped. "This grove does for my insecurities what Preparation H does for my hemorrhoids. Shrinks them without surgery. Brings to mind the grove of ancient Italy, where Romulus, shunned by his neighbors after he had slain his brother, established a sanctuary for fugitives, rebels, and aliens, the future citizens of Rome. In honor of the god Consus, kidnapped virgins were born to the grove to participate in the Bacchanalian festivals and to observe secret feasts and games. A good time was had by all." "Of course," he flapped on, skewering Amanda with that blue-eyed barbed wire glare that he reserved for persons whom he suspected of mystical inclinations. You would prefer to compare it to Jetavana, the grove at Savatthi, where the illustrious Buddha dwelt. No kidnapped virgins for old Buddha, huh? Just mangoes and figs. You are what you eat. Before Amanda could respond, Marvelous came upon a small chicken pen at the outer edge of the grove. There was in the pen a pavilion under whose roof a solitary rooster stood. "My God!" exclaimed Marvelous. "That's the most bow-legged chicken I've ever seen. It's outrageous. Why don't you just put it on display in the zoo?" Amanda shook her head. "No," she said. "He's done a lot of walking. He deserves a rest." "Why has Mr. Marvelous chosen to join us here at our zoo?" asked John Paul Ziller. The hour was midnight. He closed the book with the savage cover, the journal, and lay down beside his naked wife. "Mr. Marvelous has misplaced something and wants to make sure that we have not found it," Amanda answered. As was her nightly custom in cool climates, she was massaging her lower body with Mother's Black Snake's sunrise oil. Her tattoos glistened like a new model of the universe. "I trust that it was nothing important," muttered John Paul. "Were it important, he would not have lost it," Amanda said. Hello, reader. May the author once again intrude upon whatever mood his narrative might have established long enough to report on current events. This is the 5th day that Amanda, Baby Thor, and your correspondent have been officially held prisoner. We were surrounded for a day or two prior to that, but it was not until John Paul and Plucky fled 5 days ago that those of us who remained at the zoo were bluntly notified of our quarantine. Due to the liberation early this morning of the garter snakes, after warming them into a state of hyperactivity with a heating pad, we shooed them one by one out the back door past the dozing guards. The agents are unusually hostile. Their pornographic taunting of Amanda has become increasingly sadistic, and the writer has been assured that only a temporary restraining order from a higher echelon is preventing him from being mauled. Apparently, however, their orders bid them maintain a reasonable distance, for not since the devastating search of 4 days ago has an agent set foot upstairs. Thus, unless they spot us at a window or we venture down to the kitchen for food, we are spared their harassment, although their menacing vectors seem at times to penetrate our walls. Taking his cue from Amanda, who, in between trances, has spent the day teaching Baby Thor the songs of gypsies and Indians, the author has tried to proceed with his writing, aloof from the threatening forces that encircle him. He has done rather well, too. His Remington has been yapping since breakfast, and he has grown to appreciate the beauty of its bark. Just one more day. At the rate he is working, that is all it will take to finish this. One more good day like this one. Will they grant it? The reader may be perplexed to discover that this document is fairly near completion while there yet remains so much to learn. Please do not despair. All pertinent data concerning the corpse will be impaired ere the author brings his account to term, providing, as he has said, that the authorities grant him one more day at the typewriter minus unpleasant interruption. To those readers who may be also annoyed because this report is somewhat remiss in linear progression and does not scurry at a snappy pace from secondary climax to secondary climax to major climax as is customary in our best books, the writer is less apologetic. He is dealing with real events, which do not always unfold as neatly as even our more objective periodicals would have us believe, and he feels no obligation to entertain you with cheap literary tricks. For those of you who may have come to these pages in the course of a scholastic assignment and are impatient for information to relay to your professor, who, unless he is a total dolt, has it simmering in his brain pan already, the author suggests that you turn immediately to the end of the book and roust out those facts which seem necessary to your cause. Of course, should you do so, you will grow up half-educated and will likely suffer spiritual and sexual deprivations. But it is your decision. As we drive up the river road, There are 60,000 trees which I see but do not touch. Like me, Amanda is confined in the speeding Jeep, but she touches every tree. Entry May 10th. Notebook of M. Marvelous. The morel is a very wary little mushroom, explained Amanda. It hides under fallen leaves as if it were willfully avoiding the hunter's pluck. Like many of nature's noblest creatures, it is a fugitive kind. The Jeep piloted by John Paul was speeding up the river road. Amanda had executed rough sketches of the morel. She was showing them to Mark's Marvelous. As you can see, the cap of the morel is shaped like a thimble, a withered thimble. It is pitted, carved with irregular indentations, honeycombed, as it were. The color of the cap ranges from tan to creamy brown to a dishwasher gray, colors that echo equally in the decaying leaves underfoot and the sodden skies above. The stem is ivory white, long and hollow. Frequently you will come upon stems alone, and you may wonder where the caps have gone. To the deer, that's where morel caps are the deer's spring tonic. They spurn the stems and leave them standing. We are not as particular as the deer. A short distance from the roadside zoo, they had wheeled northeastward off the freeway and motored for a ways through fields and pastures of stinging green. Past Burlington, trees grew more plentiful, and there were bright green bogs in which the skunk cabbage looked like exploding canaries or lemons that had been hammered into sheaves. After leaving the town of Sedro-Woolley, site of Northern State Hospital for the insane, they began to climb, climbing as if the concentrated pressure of those locked-up crazies was propelling them to loftier altitudes, higher, higher. The river was an oxide green and buzzing with silvery silt. If there were fish in it, they were well concealed, but occasional steelhead fishermen stood in their flat-bottomed boats silhouetted in the Skagit mist like Mackinac raves. Landward, alders, vine maple, and cottonwood thronged down the hillsides to the edge of the road. Where these buildings' deciduous treelings were mixed with larger, older conifers, there Amanda would point and say, in April, morels lurked in those groves by the hundreds. The weather is too warm for them now. If we hope to catch morels today, we must go to higher elevations. Even there we won't find many. If we apply ourselves, we should get enough for one fine dinner. But this is definitely the last morel hunt of the season. Mark's Marvelous looked over the sketches. He read the morel's botanical name, courtesy of Madame Lincoln Rose Goody, Morchella esculenta. He re-examined the drawings. Something dark and ill-defined rustled in his arms, or wings or tail, in the hollow behind his heart. He was unconvinced that he wished to dine on these demonic fruits. Morel season could have ended sooner for all he cared. How can we be sure we aren't picking toadstools, he asked. Specialization is such a general tyranny, thought Amanda. Was it when man initiated the division of labor that he lost contact with the complete reality and began to fragment and go numb? Here we have a scientist, a man who has sacrificed his lifetime to the study of the earth and its workings, and he does not know that toadstool is just another name for mushroom, edible or toxic. How puny his particular knowledge. Still, I suppose it is necessary, isn't it? She thought these thoughts to herself as, in her mind's eye, she ran naked through the woods, hugging trees. To Marvelous, she said, if it is poison you are worried about, you had better stay away from supermarket foods with their preservatives and pesticides. Oh, I feel totally at ease in supermarkets, said Marvelous lightly. You would, thought Amanda. Canned peas are not a very potent image. A package of frozen French fries lacks roots that reach into the deep chambers of human consciousness. Ah, but mushrooms. They are standard equipment for sorcerers and poisoners, Marx? Associated in art, literature, and folklore with the wicked and exotic, the mushroom has been used since primitive times to represent death, and death's fair sister, sex. Mushrooms have been called, quote, devil's fruit, end quote, and, quote, Satan's bread, end quote. They do not take to domestication. They lurk in the forest, assume skeleton hues, and smell of rot and pan. Our dear scientist obviously is uncomfortable dabbling in the black arts of yore. She thought these thoughts to herself, as in her mind's eye she hugged each further tree trunk, bark, and lichen flaking off in green-red scrumbles against her breasts. To Marx Marvelous, she said, frankly, there is a poisonous species which is sometimes confused with the morel. It is commonly called the brain mushrooms. How Madame Goody refers to it, I do not know. And its cap is convoluted like the lobes of the organ for which it is named. That is how one distinguishes it from the morel. In fact, it is folded into many convolutions rather than depressed, as is the morel. If you examine your quarry with this distinction in mind, you cannot possibly make an unpleasant mistake. I don't know, said Marvelous, scratching in various places his living statue of natty cheeks. Mushrooming sounds to me like a risky proposition. A bit like life itself, said Amanda. Although it hasn't rained for 2 days, the forests are still sopping. The underfooting is spongy, the tree moss drips and drips. An eerie sunlight filters through the dense tangles of ominously serpentine branches. Shadows are soaked with suggestions of primordial menace and obscure, slinking malignity. White snail shells, some vacant, some stuffed with mucus, are scattered beneath the huckleberry bushes like aquatic curds, and sweating tendrils of ivy choke everything that does not move. In this rank garden of vegetable death, Amanda, more goddess than Hecate herself, rakes the nettles and ferns with her fingers, emitting eeks of Minnie Mouse surprise whenever she uncovers a treasured fungus. I dreaded the forest for its universal reminders. It is simultaneously an open womb and an open grave. But Amanda is as at home here as if it were in her own mold that was cast in the vast green frog jelly of eternity. Entry May 10th, Notebook of N. Marvelous. Eek! Squealed Amanda as underneath a great old shaggy-ass cedar she came upon a morel nearly 9 inches tall. Earlier, Amanda had told Marx the other popular edible mushrooms grow in the autumn. The morel has springtime all to itself. Well, this morel must have had itself one hell of a spring. It was the largest find of the day, the largest of the season. It was a whopper, a prize winner, a champ, a box office bonanza, but destined to be dropped right in the basket with the similar, less glamorous specimens. No star treatment here at Fungus Studios, sorry. From another part of the woods, John Paul materialized, as magicians will, and gave ex cathedra sanction to the prize. Even baby Thor was impressed. He jumped up and down, yelling, "Big one! Big one!" Mon Cole caught the fever and slapped his thighs, bowing in the exaggerated manner that he had learned at the Timbuktu Opera. He acted as if the mammoth morel were his own invention, though in truth he had not picked a single mushroom. After all, he was a famous baboon, not some truffle pig. Marx Marvelous had found only a dozen morels, but with each discovery, the thrill increased and he strutted with scientist pride to demonstrate how he had outwitted nature. They were a happy band of food gatherers, damp and smeared with hummus, but happy with the harvest, happy enough to dance, the 5 them. And about that time, a sudden wild wind gust roared up the Cascade Highlands, sounding like a hillbilly hoot, like a Saturday night wahoo. And the shadows grew more tentacular, and the sunlight more nocturnal, and the sky thickened like cornstarch, and curdled around the tops of the darkening trees. "Let's go home," they hollered, almost in harmony, and singing and chanting 4 different mushroom hymns in what appeared to be 4 different tongues. Ziller, as usual, was silent. They jeeped it on back to the low country, just ahead of the moon. "We are driving home by a different route, not following the river back, but cutting through the mountains on what is known as the Darrington Road. This is logging country, as I ascertained by the bark chips strewn on the highway, by the timber trucks snorting around the twilight curves with one last day's load for the mills. Our own vehicle navigates a curve, and suddenly it is as if we have trespassed into the shattered heart of a no-man's land. Suddenly there is no more forest. Every hillside, every ridge is bare, except for stumps and slash. A cemetery of forlorn stumps, low-spreading barricades of rain-rotted, sun-bleached slash. We are in the midst of an enormous boneyard, a battleground where armies of creatures bigger than dinosaurs might have fought and died. These murdered hills were for untold centuries green. Deer and bear and cougar and dozens of smaller animals lived here. Eagles nested in the tops of the firs. Now they are barren, devastated, splintered, twisted, silent. Not even a magpie sings. They look to be grotesque Golgothas on which have been crucified 1,000 Christs. I am no lover of the wilderness. The dark, dank woods hold for me a repertoire of unnamed fears. But if the forest is the product of satanic forces, then these forces have been surpassed by the graspings of man. No devil ever dreamed a landscape more terrible than. Entry May 10. Notebook of M. Marvelous. The barbaric spectacle of the logged-off hills stunned them mute. No one spoke until, stopped at one of Darrington's 3 traffic lights, they saw a small crowd of lumberjacks and their families lined up before a Quonset hut movie theater waiting for the show. There were children, some no larger than Thor, licking Eskimo pies. Friendly gossip ran along the line from wife to unfashionable wife. The big men seemed quiet and shy, maybe tired, maybe beaten down by their role in life, their faces already reddened by the spring sun, their Tom McCann shoes muddy, their jaws shiny with aquavelva. The medicine cabinet stink was detectable as far as the Jeep. "They look to be decent folks," observed Marx Marvelous. "Probably not a guilty conscience among them. Our society needs timber, and these loggers are merely doing their job. They probably believe they're performing a patriotic service, and maybe they are, but I wonder if deep down inside they are completely insensitive to the brutality of their operation. I wonder if those beautiful kids will grow up and repeat the slaughter. That is, if there isn't any trees left to ravage. I realize, that the logging companies are replanting, but a tree farm is not a forest, is it?" The light went green and the Jeep lunged forward. Amanda held baby Thor tightly in one arm, while with her free hand she affectionately fingered Morel's. Ziller looked over his furred shoulder, first at the logger families in the neon distance, and then at Marx Marvelous. "From little acorns grew the acorn eaters," he said. "Morels are ugly in the skillet. The caps look like the scrotums of leprechauns, the stems like the tusks of fetal elephants. Aromatically, the report is more positive. From the pan rises the smell of the whole North Wood stewing in butter. The morels grew friendlier to the nose, but in the mouth, now, there is where these dangerous-looking plants really prove themselves. My God, I must confess it. Their deliciousness exceeds normal limits of restraint. They taste similar to mealy sweetbreads, to eggplant, to country-style steak, to all 3 at once. As I munch these delectables, my fearful toadstool prejudices dissolve in a glory of saliva. Perhaps the way to a man's tolerance is through his stomach. Would our relations with China be worse if chow mein were not so popular?" Entry May 10th. Notebook of M. Marvelous. While the mushrooms fried and the rice boiled, Amanda prepared a salad. humming as she worked, filling the kitchen with hallucinatory light, a feminine splendor that jolted Mark's Marvelous's imaginative faculties and made him aware of seraphic appetites in which he professed not to believe. Soon he was on his 5th glass of Chablis. The Zillers, having long ago discovered alcohol to be a most imperfect drug, sipped their wine slowly and repeatedly refused to have their cups refilled. When it became apparent that they would not help him finish the 2 bottles he had chilled, Marvelous lifted his glass in their direction and asked, "Do you know what Bertrand Russell said about mystics?" "I do not," said Amanda, ripping the lettuce as gently as if she feared it might cry, "Ouch!" John Paul continued to let jungle murmurings escape his flute. "Russell said that there is no difference between those men who eat too little and see heaven and those who drink too much and see snakes." Marvelous leered sardonically into his wine. "The difference," said Amanda serenely, "is that one of them sees heaven and the other sees snakes." "Howdy again, ma'am," said the vaguely familiar cowboy. "I see that you've opened your zoo." "That is true," agreed Amanda. "We have." "Yep, I figured as much," said the vaguely familiar cowboy, squinting as a pas de deux in the Flea's Swan Lake. "Seeing as how you don't have a real whole lot of attractions in your show, I thought you might be interested in buying this here dog." "What dog?" asked Amanda fairly, for there was truly no canine in evidence. "That's the novelty of him, man. He's invisible." Amanda looked about for some sign of doggy activities. "You see," explained the semi-familiar cowboy, "my nephew came back from San Francisco last week fixing to go in business for himself. He buried 2,000 capsules of that LSD out by the corral. Well, our old dog, he dug up that acid and ate it all. 2,000 doses, 600,000 micrograms. We figured for sure he was going to die. But that old hound commenced to glow and get ghostly foggy looking and get harder and harder to see, and pretty soon he just disappeared altogether. Entered another dimension, my nephew tells it. Here, Teeny, here, boy." The vaguely familiar cowboy stooped down and began to pet the air. Amanda wouldn't give any money for the invisible dog, but she did offer to trade him 4 of her wishes and 3 of her dreams. This noon we dispatched the fleas. Does it astonish you that the author felt a trifle odd typing that sentence? For one thing, he felt as if he were stealing a line from Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller. "Last night Boris discovered that he was lousy. I had to shave his armpits, and even then the itching did not stop." That's how Tropic of Cancer begins. Miller could just as easily have written, "This noon we dispatched the fleas." Amanda's original plan to airmail the subject of her flea circus to a friend in Palm Springs fell through for reasons about which the writer is not certainly clear. Nevertheless, she was intent upon mailing the fleas to someone. As it turned out, she mailed them to Al's Journal of Lepidoptera in one of the pre-stamped self-addressed envelopes which Al provided for the posting of Amanda's occasional, more hallucinatory than scholarly, contributions to his magazine. "Dear Al, please see to my fleas," she wrote on violet stationery in a hand that fluttered as lyrically as a silky swallowtail. The mailing of the envelope is a story in itself, but your correspondent will keep it brief. For the past 5 days, all mail incoming to the Roadside Zoo has been intercepted by federal agents. One of them has met the postman daily and thoroughly examined his delivery before leaving it on the kitchen table for Amanda. Today, Amanda was on hand for the delivery herself. She floated up to the postman and took the letters, bills they turned out to be, from his hand before the CIA man knew what she was about. "Give them to me," the agent snapped, moving toward her like the head of a hammer moves toward attack. "Certainly," said Amanda, and she thrust the envelopes in his face, while simultaneously, with her other hand, she passed the fleagram to the mailman. It was a sleight of hand trick older than vaudeville, and cruder, but it worked. While the CIA sleuth was checking the sausage bill for coded messages, the less sinister government employee drove innocently away with the faded envelope. Even after the success of that hair-raising operation, the author had misgivings. Amanda assured him that the fleas would not be injured on their journey, and she's probably correct. If the reader has ever tried to squash one of these evasive insects between his thumb and forefinger, he knows that their armor plating leaves them well nigh unsquashable. Moreover, fleas can go for weeks without a bloody bite, so providing Al treats them to dinner upon arrival, they won't die of hunger. Al's envelope is big and bulky, so the little passenger should have sufficient oxygen. Well and good, but the envelope did not go via air and boat mail to Suez. It's halfway around the world, you know. Takes longer than Christmas. It's a hell of a trip for a flock of fleas in a plain brown envelope, particularly fleas conditioned to the excitement of circus life. Should they survive the rigors of travel, they still might die of boredom en route. Not likely, said Amanda, pointing out to the writer that the flea has been called, quote, the sexual marvel of the animal kingdom, end quote. Tiny he may be, but his libido is larger than a whale's. Proportionately speaking, so is his genital equipment. Among fleas, copulation is frequent and long in duration, an average of 3 hours per set and up to 9 hours if their passions are aroused. Our small friends suffer no lack of entertainment on their journey, vowed Amanda. Bon voyage, you little fuckers. Horoscope. Jesse James was a Virgo. He became an outlaw out of desperation. Belle Starr was an Aquarian. She became an outlaw because she was very ugly and it was the only way she could get laid. Billy the Kid was a Sagittarian. He was an outlaw for the fun of it. Another roadside attraction is also a Sagittarian, but don't jump to any conclusions. Since Marx Marvelous was interested in religion, and since in a short time he earned the Zillers' trust, if not their unqualified respect, they decided to let him in on the secret exploits of Plucky Purcell. One evening after the zoo had closed, they pressed into his hand a bundle of sloppy letters tied with giraffe skin. Return these in the morning, they said. The electric lamp in Marx's garage apartment burned most of the night. It didn't take all night to read the letters, of course, but he had to stop after each epistle to reassemble the nervous system and scrape his mind off the stars. As the reader has already been exposed to the initial Purcell letters, the author naturally will not reintroduce them. Instead, let him reproduce a slightly later correspondence perused by Marvelous that night. Dear John, Amanda, and Company, I realize that Thor can't read yet, but I'm never sure about Moncull. First off, I want to thank you for the holiday goodies. Yum, goddamn yum. Amanda's pastries justified their reputation in the mouth, in the belly, and in the brain. Had myself a high old time, all alone in my cubicle with fireballs in my eyes and crumbs on my lips. Wowee! The package disguise was perfect, too. Not one of these suspicious bastards suspected a thing. Who did you get to mail the parcel from Texas for you? Nuclear Phyllis, I'll bet. Too bad she couldn't have come along in the wrappings. I would have saved the cookies for second. I wish I could honestly say that without your gift I would have had one bad bummer of a Christmas, but for better or worse that was not the case. Considering the mood I've been in of late and my position so remote from relatives and friends, it probably surprises you to learn that I had a trippy Christmas, even when I wasn't zonked on your culinary crazies, but I did. As you know, I've been fed up here at Wildcat Creek. I've been playing this monk game for 3 months now, and I am worn out from the strain of it and paradoxically bored from the lack of action, not to mention the lack of nookie. That too. Yes, Worse, my disgust has multiplied daily for these conniving Catholic cutthroats. Every day, it seems, I learn of another wormy plot that's being hatched or hear of these pious pigs bragging about a caper he once pulled. It used to make my blood boil to hear these things, but anymore it just depresses me, shuts off my joy like I forgot to pay the bill, and the joy company sent these monks around to disconnect my service. Let me list a few items, and you'll see what I mean. At this point, in an epistolary style that rattles and wombles like loose headlamp on a Hell's Angels hog, Plucky describes in varying degree of detail certain activities of the Society of the Felicitator, which he had not previously cataloged. After wrestling with a dilemma that cost him a precious half hour's writing time, the author has decided to delete Plucky's specific references that the clandestine Roman Catholic order known as the Society of the Felicitator is a sinister organization engaged in espionage, intimidation, and guerrilla warfare has been stated in these pages with sufficient emphasis. Should a reader desire details, or should he have a specific field of interest such as Latin America, where the Felicitate Society plays an adhesive police role in the coalition of the church and dictatorial regimes, let him look elsewhere. Surely now that the rosary beads have been spilled, there will be no shortage of anti-Catholic writers willing and anxious to research the felicitators and expose their practices. That, however, is not the purpose of this report. For all the author knows, the felicitators may be no more typical of Catholic monks than Bluebeard was typical of French husbands. While the writer has no intention of sidestepping controversial issues, he wants it made oxygen clear that his document is not biased against any race, religion, creed, or place of natural origin. In the unsullied shadow of the giant propitious weenie, bigotry is out of the question. Only when it is relevant to the story of the corpse will information unfavorable to a particular faith be imparted. The author aspires to be as gracious toward Rome as was neatly normal Jimmy toward Peking when, upon learning of the Chinese rape of Tibet, he said simply, "What do you expect of a race that invented gunpowder and hot mustard?" And now as the mid-afternoon gray clings to the Skagit landscape the way the shape of Transylvania clings to outdated maps of Europe, let us return to Plucky Purcell's Yuletide epistle. Well, when I learned that my next assignment might include assassination, I really went on a bummer. I couldn't take it anymore. I had about decided a week before Christmas to burn this viper's nest to the ground. That's only 11 monks here now, excluding head butcher Father Gustad and me. Rest of them are out spying, compiling portfolios on Father Grappi of Milwaukee and other, quote, bleeding heart Christians, end quote. Those of us left here are evidently considered hardcore hatchet men. We are the eliminators, so I fancied I'd just set a torch to the place and eliminate the eliminators. I think I could do it at such an hour and in such a way as to catch all the jackals in their dens. I mean, why not wipe them out? Their human qualities were wiped out years ago by their Roman manipulators. They're merely robots programmed to kill. I can get rid of the cream of the Vatican shock troops, including ex-Nazi Gustad, plus some valuable espionage equipment, all with one paper match. Should I do it? Could I do it? My decision, I believe, would have been an affirmative one, and Christmas Eve would have been my target date, except that that decision was reversed or altered or at least postponed by the arrival at Wildcat Creek of some very charming holiday guests. Sister Hilary, Sister Elizabeth, and Brother Bruno were Canadians, members of liberal orders that for some had been administering to Mexican migrants in California. The three of them had left California on temporary assignment to survey conditions among Indians of the Northwest Coast. They had covered Oregon and the Chinook tribes of Lower Washington and were at the Quinault Reservation near Hum Tulips when they were granted furloughs to spend Christmas with their families. One of these people, quote, family, end quote, meant other brothers and sisters of the church. They had heard about the monastery on nearby Wildcat Creek, knew that it was isolated, and decided that it might be a charitable act to come over and spend Christmas with us. They arrived bearing oranges and turkeys and three of the nicest Campbell's Soup Kid smiles I'd ever seen. They looked like little black tents in their habits, and I wanted to crawl inside and smoke their smiles in my hookah. No fooling. They were lovely, gentle folks. I got scared for them right away. They were the very kind of clergy that the Felicitate Society was out to suppress. The very kind, and they had wandered like giddy flies into this Venus trap, and I was worried that they were in actual physical danger. But no, old Gestotz, he knew how to handle the situation. He wasn't going to arouse any suspicions. He welcomed those poor innocents with open arms. How hospitable that old pig-sticker was. You'd have thought he was St. Nick himself. He was pooping plum pudding and peeing eggnog. Brought out the best brandy, cigars, and wine. And after we got the radio equipment and weapons hidden, we had a merry time. When I described the sisters and brother Bruno as innocents, I didn't mean to imply that they were underdone do-gooders. These people had been around. They had been into some heavy trips. They had been cursed and threatened by landowners in California, and Bruno had been beaten up in Mississippi once, and Sister Hillary had been shot at. They had subsisted on bad, starchy food and slept on straw beds and endured all sorts of hardship. They were strong people, all three of them, and tough in a very gentle way and beautiful. Especially was Sister Hillary beautiful. She was like a certain early morning image of Ingrid Bergman photographed forever in the eye of a swan. I would watch her saying her rosary like maybe a beer can watches the ocean saying its surf, and I wanted to tiptoe up to her and kiss her cheek. She was the only woman that I've ever met that I can kiss without copping a feel. Except for my mama and sisters, of course, and I'm not too sure about my sisters. I came on to Sister Hillary kind of rough her second day here. You see, I've spent a little time in migrant labor camps myself. I picked the apples and grapes and hops. And I know that every Friday night in those camps there is a bingo game sponsored by the Catholic Church. Those poor, impoverished, undernourished, ill-clothed Chicano migrants can spend half or more of their week's pay on fringing bingo and have nothing to show for it but some tacky little plaster of Paris Virgin Mary. I've seen it happen. Just ask any fruit tramp. So I got on to Sister Hillary about it, and she acknowledged that it was a questionable practice. She wouldn't let herself speak critically of the church, but she intimated with tender understatement that there were areas in which the church was failing the poor, and she got very sad-eyed about it, and I can tell that it was hard for her to hold back the tears. I felt so low I could have needed a 12-foot stepladder to get into a Volkswagen. Christmas Eve, Father Gestotz said a midnight mass. I haven't had much experience with such entertainments, but as far as I could tell, he did a pretty good job, except that Gestotz Latin was even more dense than his English. His nouns were like cannonballs, and his verbs, well, it would have taken 2 men and a boy to carry one. It must have been the heaviest mass on records, a massive mass, if you'll excuse me. It's a wonder we didn't sink through the earth from the weight of it. Afterwards, Sister Hillary and I went outside to look for the Star of the East. It was a mild night, and we sat on a log, stargazing. A piece of moonlight fell through the clouds and hit her wedding band. I remembered then that she was married to Jesus Christ. She was married to a concept of universal love and brotherhood, not intellectually committed to it or emotionally attracted to it, but married to it. She lived with it, and it fucked her and filled her with itself, and she was part of it and one with it, in private and in public. And for it she lived in poverty and worked long hours and wore unbecoming clothing and risked her very life. She was the blushing bride of love, the wife who sleeps in the bed of peace and washes its shorts and packs its lunch. Corny and insane, but by damn true. She sat on that mossy log in movie star radiance, and moonbeams flocked around her like birds around St. Francis. It was damn near a miracle. At that moment it became clear to me how my own thinking was distorted. I was filled with hate and disgust for Catholicism. I had progressed from its passive detractor to its active enemy. I dreamed of its fall. I conjured in visions the collapse of its tyranny. But I could not have been thinking of the whole of Catholicism because Sister Hillary was a part of that whole. Sister Hillary and hundreds, thousands like her. What of them? What of these things of goodness and courage? The history of the Catholic Church is written on charred pages splashed with gore. It is a history of inquisitions and genocides, of purges and perversions, of ravings and raisings. Yes, but Through those same bloody pages walk parades of saints playing their celestial radios and sowing their sparkles of love. What of the great enlightened souls zonked out the infinite? What of the saints so high on divine energy that they kissed those who censured them and blessed those who put them to death? What of the Catholic Christian Buddhas and Roman Hindu Vishnus whose melted hearts are the true gold of Rome? It occurred to me that Catholicism is a duality of good and evil, that it is a microcosm of secular society. One cannot hate society because within society there are loving and lovable individuals. Similarly, it wasn't the church I hated because the church contained the bravery and enlightenment of many individual priests and nuns and saints. The fact is, what I hated in the church was what I hated in society, namely authoritarians, power freaks, rigid dogmatists, those greedy, underloved, undersexed twits who want to run everything. While the rest of us are busy living, busy tasting and testing and hugging and kissing and goofing and growing, they are busy taking over. Soon their sour tentacles are around everything: our governments, our economies, our schools, our publications, our arts, and our religious institutions. Men who lust for power, who are addicted to laws and other unhealthy abstractions, who long to govern and lead and censor and order and reward and punish. Those men are the turds of Moloch. Men who don't know how to live. Men who are sickly afraid of death and therefore are afraid of life. They fear all that is chaotic and unruly and free-moving and changing. Thus, as Amanda had said, they fear nature and fear life itself. They deny life and in so doing deny God. They are presidents and governors and mayors and generals and police officials and chairmen of the boards. They are crafty cardinals and fat bishops and mean old Monsignor masturbators. They are the most frightened and most frightening mammals who prowl the planet. Loveless, anal, compulsive, control freak authoritarians, and they are destroying everything that is wise and beautiful and free. And the most enormous ironic perversion is how they destroy in the name of Christ, who is peace, and God, who is love. Authority is the most damaging trauma to which the psyche is subjected between birth and death. Isn't that true, Amanda? Nobody likes authority. You might object that authoritarians must like it, but they don't. They merely resort to it in order to avenge themselves on those who have imposed it on them. From the first moment a fresh new human hears the command, quote, "Stop that or daddy spank," unquote, his outraged subconscious begins to plot revenge. Often his revenge is misdirected and merely perpetuates the sad old cycle of authority rebellion. Sometimes it leads to activity that is characterized as criminal or insane. It was leading me to destructive behaviors, I could see that. It's reactions like mine that give anarchy a bad name. So I made a decision that night in the Christmas moonshine. I decided that if the church could produce people like Sister Hillary and her pals, and if they, however blindly, could serve the church, then the church must still be capable of being a mighty force for good. Does that make sense? And if the church has all this potential magic locked up in its velvet heart, there must be a way to release it. Here I was, non-Catholic, anti-Catholic Plucky Purcell, cast with the most extreme extension of the anti-life element of Roman authority. Maybe, just maybe, there was something I could do. What? Hell, I don't know. But maybe something would turn up, and maybe there would be an unexpected opportunity to help shift the weight of Catholicism toward Sister Hillary's side. Maybe I could do something more positive than cremating a dozen treacherous monks. At least it wouldn't hurt to stick around a while longer and find out. In the event of failure, I could always turn back to the torch. What I'm trying to say, gang, is don't bother to put any beer on ice. I'm going to be at Wildcat Creek for a few more months. I may not survive the ordeal, but wouldn't it be a splendidly compensating irony that Randy Old Purcell meet his end as the result of a promise made silently to a virgin nun? Thanks again for the cosmic cookies. You will be rewarded, but in the next life, as is customary among Christians. Hee hee. Good luck with your sausages. Dead and breathing, signed, Brother Dallas. The next 3 or 4 letters were less dramatic. Purcell's new cause produced nothing immediately tangible. The only major development at Wildcat Creek was in the way of sexual release. Plucky met a 15-year-old Quinault Indian girl who lived about 3 miles from the monastery in a cabin with her alcoholic grandfather. Their subsequent friendship made for some tangy descriptive passages in Plucky's correspondence. Otherwise, there was little more than further cataloging of the Felicitate Society's nefarious activities. Despite his obvious pleasure in his underage paramour, Purcell grew bored again. Various schemes for escape were outlined. Purcell's waning enthusiasm was not transferred to Mark's Marvelous. Mark's remained steadfastly goggle-eyed as he trembled through the nearly illegible chronicles. At the bottom of the pile, stuck to the giraffe skin by the deteriorating mucilage on its flap, he found the thinnest envelope in the bunch. Marvelous anticipated an anticlimax. He was wrong. Scrawled across the Tootsie Roll wrapper with a marking pencil was the following announcement. Just received my new assignment. In 10 days, I depart for the Vatican to serve as karate instructor to the Swiss Guard. You don't eat meat, observed Mark's Marvelous. This was a week after the reading of Purcell's letter, and the ambivalent young scientist could at last talk of something else. No, I don't, said Amanda. John Paul eats meat. That he does. He considers it man's evolutionary duty to devour other species. My husband will never kill anything he is not prepared to eat. That's a pretty good practice, admitted Mark's Marvelous. If everyone cultivated that habit, there would be fewer murders and no war. Or a booming cannibal, said Amanda. Beneath the big spruce, she and Mon Cole were tossing a fluorescent red rubber football. The baboon style reminded Marks of a certain pro quarterback he'd seen on television. But you don't touch meat. Oh, I touch meat all the time, said Amanda coyly. She lowered her lashes and jived her tongue along the brim of her lip. Marvelous blushed. You know what I mean. Yes, laughed Amanda. I do not ingest meat. Those teachers whom I most admire set that example for me eons ago. The cow became a sacred symbol to the Hindu because it gave milk and chops and hide, said Mark Marvelous, and he went on to debunk the spiritual origins of vegetarianism. The author relayed Marx's argument earlier, as the attentive reader surely recalls. Amanda made no immediate response. She glided out past the bow-legged rooster's pen to pull down a pass from Mon Cole. But clearly her vegetarian sentiments suffered a jolt. At twilight, Amanda went into trance. She returned in time for dinner. You are right, Mark's Marvelous, she announced. Spiritually, it is as proper to eat an animal as a plant. Well, I'll be damned, said Marvelous with a smug chuckle. You saw the light. Here, you're in for a treat. He passed the platter of sausages. No, refused Amanda. I still shall eat no meat. Carnivorousness may be karmically acceptable, but stockyards are not. Besides, when an animal is killed, it is usually in a state of panic or fright. Fright releases in a mammal certain hormones which swamp the blood and penetrate the flesh. When you eat meat, you eat the animal's fear. I want as little fear in my system as possible. She helped herself to the dandelion buds. Marvelous was exasperated. But you did say now that spiritually it's all right to eat meat. Of course, said Amanda. At the highest levels of consciousness, all things are one anyway. There is no difference between animal, vegetable, and mineral. Everything just blends together in energy and light. Mark's Marvelous tried to imagine the sausages in God's state, but though they were as plump and passive as little Buddhas, he could not handle the image. Pass the mustard, he said. The June morning, thin and gray, arched over the Skagit Valley like a plucked eyebrow. At the mailbox of the Captain Kendrick Memorial Hot Dog Wildlife Preserve, the postman seemed to linger longer than he did usually. This triggered a Faradism of excitement in the roadhouse, for whether he expressed it or not, each adult human inhabitant of the Kendrick Memorial was anxiously awaiting word from the Vatican. Plucky Purcell at home with the Pope, a cozy picture. Ziller, who had been polishing the tsetse fly, was first to the letterbox. He returned to last with forced nonchalance, bearing only the water bill, the June issue of Al's Journal of the Lepidoptera, and Amanda's current selection from the Animal Cracker of the Month Club. Very well, Professor Marvelous, said Amanda. You have been with us for a month. Have you figured out what mysterious functions Jean-Paul and I are performing here on our, quote, psychic frontier, end quote? She asked the question without looking up from the microscope beneath the lens of which she was sewing a tiny suit of lights for a matador flea. Are you kidding? How could I figure out what you're up to when you're so damn secretive? What an outgoing couple. Sometimes I feel like I'm living with Greta Garbo and Howard Hughes, if you could imagine Howard Hughes marrying Greta Garbo and opening a roadside zoo. You and Ziller disappear into your sanctuaries for hours every day. I hear sounds, smell odors, all very strange, none very revealing. You must have some ideas about our activities. Oh, I do, you bet I do. Then tell me one, please. He adored the way she said, please. It was like listening to an alligator bite into a Hollywood bed. Okay, I'll tell you one. Freedom. I believe that you people, among other things, are obsessed with recovering a lost model of existence, a total lifestyle in which there are no boundaries between object and subject, between natural and supernatural, between walking and dreaming. It's involved somehow in a return to the consanguinity of life and art, life and nature, life and religion, a ritualistic, mythic level of living which whole societies once experienced in common. The object of your rituals, I believe, is to break free of the conventions that have chained man to certain cliché images and predictable responses that have narrowed pitifully, in your opinion at least, the range of his experience. Amanda whistled with admiration, although due to her crooked teeth, she did not whistle well. It was more of a blow. Oh my, she blew admiringly. How do you manage to talk like that in clear weather? For me, it would take the most rambunctious thunderstorm these parts have ever seen. It would play hell with the pea fields. Lightning might strike the big sausage, in which case it would be worth it, no matter what I said. Marvelous didn't fully understand. I don't imagine it storms much in this climate, he noticed. But do you admit there's truth in my observation? The quote, but, end quote, that crouched like a strange sailor in the doorway of his second sentence did not in any way tie his first remark to his second one. It was a, quote, but, end quote, more ornamental than conjunctional. A speech as fancy as that one doesn't have truth in it, said Amanda, busily sewing. It's like asking if there's truth in the Imperial Russian Easter eggs. Without looking up from the microscope, she could tell that Marx was disappointed with her reply, so she added, I will admit to a lifelong and regular fascination with freedom. Why do you suppose that is? Maybe you're in rapport with William Blake, offered Marvelous. Blake once wrote, I must invent my own systems or else be enslaved by other men's. Not to get your mind back on the Vatican and Christianity, said Amanda, who, as curious as she might be, was nevertheless showing signs of wariness with all this hubbub about religion, but our friend Plucky Purcell is an admirer of William Blake. Plucky always says one has to admire a man who, for 175 years, can get away with rhyming I and symmetry. While awaiting news from the mud pluck at the Holy See, Amanda herself had an encounter with the Christian ethos. Let Marx Marvelous tell it. Through the loosest of verbal agreements, I am now manager of the Ziller's Roadside Zoo. My duties have not been formally defined, but they consist chiefly of explaining to customers why we serve nothing but hot dogs and juice. I've become quite efficient at preparing our wares, and were it not for The trouble, some explanations I could refuel a couple dozen tourists in about 5 minutes. In between slipping weenies into buns and indulging in the Freudian fantasies concomitant to such occupation, I lecture on the attractions of our establishment. My San Francisco garter steak lecture includes a pitch for conservation and is popular with little old ladies. My talk on Glossina palpalis, an African tsetse fly, is fraught with allusions to blood-sucking jaws and headachy natives who drop off into eternal slumbers, although in fairness to scientific findings and to Amanda's fondness for insects, indeed for all living things, I add that the tsetse fly is not poisonous but merely a communicator of infected parasites, and that both the prevalence and severity of sleeping sickness have been greatly exaggerated. Despite the anticlimax, the kids enjoy the tsetse fly talk. I'm not as adept with fleas as I'd like to be. The chariot races I stage never stay on course. Invariably, they end in embarrassing, if not dangerous, collisions. I am pleased to report, however, that John Paul has only slightly better results. Amanda alone is capable of harnessing the full strength and concentration of the fleas, of causing them to hop with precision, with poetry, with passion and wit. The Zillers spend more time downstairs at the Zoo Cafe than I had anticipated they might. Any suspicions I harbored that the zoo was merely their source of funds, an economic ploy in which they had little real interest, have evaporated. What now appears fact is that Amanda and John Paul, whatever their private pursuits here, are more than a trace concerned about the tourists who stop by. They deliberately interact with the customers always, I think, with a definite goal in mind, although they move with such subtlety, the Zillers, that I could not hope to prove premeditation of any kind. Yet there they are, John Paul softly playing one of his flutes or drums, condescending to make small talk that gradually metamorphoses into some vigorously curving and folding monologue that embraces in its dark syntax both coasts of Africa, or is it India? Amanda, charming, young and old, with the tone of her aliveness. There are times when, for monetary reasons, I would prefer that the Zillers remain upstairs or out back in the grove. Their effect on customers is not always positive. In fact, I would estimate that 30 or 35% of the motorists who stop at the Kendrick Memorial Retreat shortly thereafter in fear and disgust. They're wearing their long-billed Toyo caps and their canvas yachting shoes. They're packing their traveler's checks and their Enco maps. They've got their litter bags and their first aid kits. They are equipped and ready, don't you know, for the caprices of the open road. But oh heavens, they hadn't prepared for that hussy in her gypsy colors, for that tall man with the bone in his nose. Not here, not in the gentle croplands of northwestern Washington. How unexpected. How, quote, well, frankly, we wouldn't trust the food in a place like this, end quote. 1 minute, Amanda will be chatting informatively about fleas and tsetse flies, and the next, as if she used the habits of insects and parables of human behavior, she will be talking about life and the potentiality of living it. There are men who do not take off and leave their departments in the hand of incompetence for 2 whole weeks in order to be reminded in some ding-a-ling little roadside dive of the greatest possibilities of existence. They stop for coffee and feel cheated if served the meaning instead. On the whole, however, the Zillers' impact on our visitors is stimulating if a bit uncommon. Sometimes it is the customer himself who provides the thrust of the exchange. Like, for example, what happened today when a Protestant minister dropped by. As the preacher looked over our steaks, thinking God knows what serpentine thoughts about Adam and herpetological dingery in Eden, Amanda floated up and engaged him in conversation. It was 5 minutes or more before I could get away from the counter, but when I had the chance, I moved in close. There was one exchange I did not want to miss. A 3 dogs with everything motorcyclist, a 3-dog night, soon arrived, so I didn't have long to linger. but while I was in hearing distance, I recorded the following dialogue. Minister: No, I had no connection with the military forces in Vietnam. I was a civilian missionary. My wife and I ministered the Barnar tribesmen. The Barnar are primitive people, and were not involved politically in the war. Amanda: How did you enjoy the Barnar? Minister: We weren't there to enjoy them. We were there to help them. But they were very friendly to us, if that's what you meant. The Barnar Vietnamese are basically fine, simple folks. Of course, they had some extremely backward ideas. Amanda: Could you please give me an example? Minister: Well, for example, your Barnar believed that good souls go live under the earth when they die, and bad souls go live in the sky. You could see what that implies. They thought heaven was down and hell was up. Amanda: But you changed all that? Minister: Oh yes, of course. That's what we were there for. We taught them. It was just the other way around. It was a peekaboo summer. The sun was in and out like Mickey Rooney. One day the Puget wind would lug monoliths of quartz in from the Pacific and leave them lying about all over the sky. The next day, as if some fastidious crew of giants had worked through the night, there wouldn't be a boulder cloud in sight. The atmosphere would be high, wide, and blue. Sunlight would salt the turgid old sloughs, and the air would be so warm, and still you could hear a woodpecker for 3 miles and a squirrel for 2. Hear them above the pea-field tractors. Hear them above the freeway traffic even. The sunny side was up on the Thursday afternoon that Mark's Marvelous squatted, keeping his hemorrhoids safely aloft, beside John Paul Ziller in the parking lot. The Captain Kendrick Memorial, etc., closed every Thursday, and on this day off, Ziller had been working on the building. Amanda had wanted to go inner tubing on the river, but Ziller had asked her to wait a couple of hours while he performed some carpentry that seemed to have less to do with the roadhouse's function than with its identity. The edifice was in a constant state of change. It seemed to lollop and dive through space, to bloom each fortnight into a new experience of extent, color, mass, and direction. Maybe scientists and artists can never fully understand each other's pursuits, thought Marvelous, squatting beside the resting Ziller. The great thick spheroids that John Paul had just added to the building seemed to Marvelous to be entirely unnecessary, a waste of energy and material. He pondered them in vain. Would he ever fathom the mind of this man? John Paul, he asked, didn't you once do a painting on the inside of a parachute and then repack the chute so that the only way anyone could enjoy your painting was to jump out of an airplane and look up at it on the way down? What was the purpose of that? Ziller wiped his dark brow with a square of Nigerian cotton. He gazed long across the tidal flats the way an aborigine scans for game. I wanted to test the art lover's commitment, he answered with unexpected straightforwardness. It might be desirable for museums and galleries to devise a similar test. In case there would be damn few visitors to museums and galleries, Mark suggested. Are you more interested in quantity than quality? In the laboratory, isn't one good catalyst preferable to dozens of substances that produce unsatisfactory reactions or no reactions at all? I can see your point, I guess, said Marx. Did anyone ever go to the trouble to look at your painting? Oh, yes. A young Italian Contessa paid me $500 for the privilege. And what was her reaction? I don't know, said Ziller. The chute failed to open. The sun sounded its alarm at the 2 men, the one of them stroking his chin in befuddlement, the other gazing toward the distant Chinese outcropping, a smile sliding across his face the way a Louisiana black snake slides across a cemetery lawn. The sun's alarm went off in their brains. In a matter of minutes, the flesh of Mark's Marvelous would pinken. Tropic Trex had awarded Ziller a quantum of immunity, but he too was completely aware of the beam of heat. John Paul, quote source and quote is a word that people associate with you. You are forever seeking out your sources. Mark squinted at the white blur of sun. Now, as you must know, solar radiation is the basic source of life. The rays of the sun are converted through photosynthesis into chemical bonds responsible for producing the carbohydrates and other tissue components whose energies directly maintain the existence of both plants and animals. Solar radiation is the source of all biological energy, and ultimately, it is the source of you. Marvelous pause. Ziller nodded ever so slightly and continued staring into the west. You do see what I'm getting at, Marx went on. If you persist in returning to your sources, then sooner or later, you'll have to go back to the sun. Marx meant it more or less as a joke, but Ziller accepted it at face value. Yes, he said through his arsenal of teeth. Returning to sunlight is an inevitability that I've been reckoning with. His eyes kept patrolling the horizon, as if he expected something of great interest to appear there. Something or someone. Could Ziller, do you suppose, have been anticipating the corpse? No, that couldn't be. Amanda is the clairvoyant. Besides, the corpse came from the opposite direction. Because he was a fugitive from an alimony decree, Marx Marvelous was nervous about visiting Mount Vernon and Seattle. If his friends had any illegal botanical matter on their persons, as they sometimes did when they went into town, he was doubly apprehensive. He practically walked with his head in a swivel. Consequently, he was soon the recipient of what might be called Amanda's universal advice for paranoiacs. About those men who are following you around and watching your house at nights, don't be alarmed. Try to think of them as talent scouts from Hollywood.